Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. Welcome to today's Rupa live class. My name is Adrian Martinez. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a moment, just to give some folks the opportunity to hop in. I see these attendance numbers climbing. So in the meantime, let's play my favorite game. I love to know where everyone is joining us from. Write in the chat where you're joining us from. I'd love to see it. A couple Norway people to start it off. Here we go. Texas, all caps. There we go. Ohio, Nebraska. Simona, hello. India, here we go. Encinitas, NC, North County, I love it. I went to school down in San Luis Obispo, and I'm pretty sure about half my friends went to LCC High School, so very familiar with Encinitas. Washington, beautiful. I'll be up in Washington for New Year's this year. I'm actually going to a town called Leavenworth, Washington. Christmas town, very excited for it. Should be a great time. Austin, I love Austin. Colorado, was just out there last weekend. Topanga, my favorite Boy Meets World character. Relating a lot with the people here. It's fantastic. Dr. Chapman, are you here with us as well?
I am here, Adrian.
Wonderful. All right. We've got some good places, some good people here with us today. So I'm excited. We have a fantastic guest and a fantastic presentation for all of you here today. And as these numbers continue to climb, we won't waste any more time so we can get into the reason why we're all here today. And that's to learn from Dr. Chapman. So welcome everyone to today's Rupa Live class presented by Rupa University, the best way to learn about specialty lab work from industry experts. My name is Adrian Martinez, and as always, I will be your host for today's presentation. Today we have a very, very special guest in Dr. Michael Chapman with Genova Diagnostics, here to walk us through the NutrEval, the intersection of micronutrient testing and cellular health. Before jumping in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you do have any questions, please use that Q&A button down in your menu bar, and we'll host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation with Dr. Chapman. Immediately following Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order the NutrEval directly from Rupa Health. And if you have to jump early, no worries at all. We are recording this session as we always do, and you'll be able to access it on rupauniversity.com in the coming days. Additionally, if you are a fan of this type of content, be sure to check out rupauniversity.com to see all the previous sessions that we've done, as well as upcoming boot camps that we're doing along with Genova. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Chapman. Dr. Chapman has a doctorate in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington. He is currently the Director of Product Innovation at Genova Diagnostics. Aside from educating and consulting with integrative and functional medicine practitioners, he is responsible for researching and developing new test profiles. In addition, he has delivered presentations nationwide at functional and integrative medicine conferences, some of the conferences I've been at. Dr. Chapman is a writer and contributor to the latest edition of the Textbook of Natural Medicine by Joe Pisano and Michael Murray, authoring chapters on urinary organic testing and urinary porphin analysis. Also, he is the co-host of the Genova Diagnostics podcast titled The Lab Report, so be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Chapman. I will go ahead and let you take it from here.
Awesome. My pleasure, Adrian. Thank you for inviting me, the opportunity, and look forward to getting into it. So I just want to make sure you can see my screen full and clear here.
Yep, looks good.
All right. So, one of the things that I always think about when it comes to micronutrient testing is, we can use it clinically one way, which is to assess whether somebody's got adequate nutrition. Do they need more supplements, B vitamins, minerals, things like that? And I think that's a very effective tool for sure. One of the things when we were kind of taking another look at a test like this, where we're measuring organic acids, amino acids, fatty acids, it sort of gets the mind whirling around the fact that this is really a look inside the cell of the individual. And we know that the cell requires a lot of nutrients, and that's where we get that information. But the other thing about it is that the cellular health can also be assessed from a functional level. So really, when I think about a test like this, whether it's organic acids, amino acids, fatty acids, or the combination of all of those together, it's about a cellular analysis. And that can give you even greater clinical insight, because once that cell becomes dysfunctional, then you can guarantee that if that continues down the road, the tissue is going to become dysfunctional and the system's going to become dysfunctional. So really, when we talk about root cause, a test like this can give you so much information into both of these areas. And so with that some of the things we're going to talk about today is, what are the core concepts with a nutritional evaluation? What are the core concepts I was just talking about as it relates to cellular health? And then we're going to talk about the NutrEval and, how the NutrEval and the metabolomics are different and connected. If you've seen some of the presentations or seen the metabolomics out there in practice, what makes the NutrEval a little bit different? And then some additional insights that, help with overall nutritional testing. Like, what are some things that you want to know? And so taking a 30,000-foot glance at this, some important concepts about nutritional assessments is that, functional assessments are different from direct measurements. We're very used to sending labs off to, your local lab to get a serum B12 or, a folate. And what is that telling you? How is a test like this different? Well, a folate, an RBC folate, is actually just a direct measurement. It's measuring the concentration of that molecule in the whatever you're measuring it in, such as serum. A functional assessment is different because the functional assessment looks at how those nutrients are being utilized within the cell. So for example, folate or B12, we're not just measuring it directly, we're actually analyzing 15, 20 different pathways that require folate B12 to make them function. And so it's an algorithm-derived assessment looking at all those needs for cofactors such as folate and B12. It's not just a direct measurement. So that's one way that it's different. Sometimes we talk about whether a test is an intracellular analysis or an extracellular analysis. I think this is an important distinction to make as well, because in intracellular analysis is presumed to be, okay, well, we looked inside the white blood cell or we looked inside the red blood cell, whereas an extracellular analysis is presumed to be, we looked in the plasma where there's not cells. And I don't know that that's necessarily a fair distinction for all nutrient testing. So just as an example, something like RBC magnesium, red blood cell potassium, red blood cell magnesium, you get a lot of insight from measuring how much magnesium is in the red blood cell as compared to the plasma, but not everything works that way. Things float differently and they bind to red blood cells, white blood cells differently. So the way that we approach this concept is we say, okay, well, what's the most appropriate way to get an assessment of that nutrient? Is it inside the cell or outside the cell? Is it in the plasma? And we've actually done that analysis, whether it's glutathione or CoQ10. We've done that analysis for so many of these different nutrients. And so we're combining those two methods on a test like the NutrEval. Another thing is that always we want to think about nutritional needs in the face of the clinical case in front of you. And so say, for instance, somebody's been taking a lot of supplements, they've been taking a lot of B vitamins, and they get a result back that shows their levels of B vitamins were, not that high, or maybe they were high. We're always trying to understand the information we're getting relative to the case. And that's the reason why we run the test, is we don't always know what we're going to get out of it. So just a kind of another reminder to compare results to what you're seeing with the patient in front of you, rather than just using a direct lab number to guide treatment. And then I just mentioned supplement influences. So some people will choose to leave their patients on a supplement to do testing, especially if they've had them on sort of a long-standing regimen and they're just trying to figure out whether they need to tweak it a little bit. Whereas other physicians will decide to have people come off their supplements to get more of a baseline reading. And I think either of those approaches are fair, but it's just a matter of what you're really trying to get out of the test result. Are you starting with a new patient and you just really want to see what their baseline cellular health looks like before throwing a bunch of things at them? Maybe they've been on so many supplements for a long time and you're trying to clear the air, or they're sort of had them for years and years, they're doing fairly well, and you just want to see if they need any tweaks. So both of those things can be done with a test like this. Just to kind of quickly walk through the look of the test, the front page is really a results overview that tells you more about that cellular health function that I was mentioning, and we'll go over this in more detail. The second page is the nutrient need overview, which is where we churn out the recommendations for assistance from a nutrient perspective. The third page, fourth page, the third page, and also the next couple pages after that are more so a patient handout version of interpretation. This is a little bit more patient friendly. It walks them through each one of these nutrients, what score they got for that nutrient, and then some more information like what might be wrong with having a low vitamin A, what could be the problem, could be the cause of that, and what are some food sources. So that's a pretty helpful handout there. The next page is a little bit of a pathway graphic that I'll go into in fairly good detail. And then we get into the raw results of the test. And as you'll see, there's a lot of results on this test. And it just goes to show that this is all the data that we're using to generate those nutrient recommendations. So if you were just to get a recommendation around folate from your, from maybe another lab that did a direct measurement, you would basically have one analyte. You can see we have, hundreds of analytes on a test like this that's all feeding in to generate more of that information, more well-rounded approach to nutrient assessment. So I'm just going to start with this front page and kind of show you what we're really doing, how to read this test. This is the results overview. We always try to take a high level at the beginning. So if you've got a busy practice and you don't have time to go through every single analyte, or maybe you just need a reminder, right there on the front page, it gives you the highlights of what we found from a functional imbalance perspective for this patient. So we've got these green, yellow, red color-coded functional indicators, and then underneath we have scores. We have functional imbalance scores. And the 5 key areas that we deduced from a test like this was oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, omega imbalance, toxic exposure, and methylation imbalance. And if some of those or all of those are new terms to you, don't worry, we're going to get into it just a little bit here in a second. But the nice thing about a test like this and having these functional imbalance scores is that it tells you maybe a little bit more where to start. It doesn't just overwhelm you with so much data that you get kind of, therapeutic paralysis, but it's telling you, oh, for this patient, these scores of 6, 7, and 6 are probably more important than the other ones. And if I focus there, I might even get some relief from some of those other areas as well, like oxidative stress that didn't get as high of a score for this particular test. So some rules here around the key. The 0 to 4 scale is showing you that there's minimal need for support. 5 to 7 is moderate. 8 to 10 is high, kind of like a green, yellow, red stop sign configuration. Red generally meaning not as great as green in this particular case. And the way that this works, how we came up with it, was it's an algorithm that's using 2 different factors. Okay, if you see underneath the score, there's a list of analytes. Those are all the analytes that went into and contributed to that score. And so how, the severity of the abnormal has a lot to do with that overall score. So if we look at the second one there, mitochondrial dysfunction at a 6, the glutathione is a very part of that algorithm for mitochondrial dysfunction. And so if glutathione was very abnormal, that would contribute and weight heavily. And then also it's based on the strength of the evidence, how that biomarker relates to that dysfunction. So we actually comb the literature for any sort of relationship between the biomarker and that dysfunction. And so you can be guaranteed that an algorithm like this, it wasn't just because, oh, it seems like that looks nice, or it makes sense that, maybe cysteine would contribute to oxidative stress. We actually based all the weighting on evidence-based connections and associations in the research. So that's a pretty unique factor of this algorithm as well. And again, those analytes underneath the scores, you can get a red triangle, meaning it was outside the reference range. That biomarker was outside the reference range, or a yellow, which means it was in between 1 and 2 standard deviation. If you ever see something like an NA, that means for whatever reason that analyte was not run. And if you ever get an NA in the actual score, that means that whole section was not run for whatever reason. So let's kind of dig into these concepts just a little bit. Oxidative stress is free radical damage, right? This can be damage to DNA, fats, membranes, and it's associated with all sorts of clinical associations, cardiovascular disease risk, metabolic dysfunction, cancer. Oxidative stress is definitely something we want to limit, but it's also a big part of the aging process overall. It's generally thought that, for the most part, oxidative stress and inflammation are the big things that drive the aging process. And that's because it damages cells. And the more you're damaging cells, the more you're having to replace cells, the more you're grinding down those telomeres. And that's the aging process right there. So it makes sense to want to limit that. And then mitochondrial dysfunction is really a breakdown in the energy production within the cell. Mitochondria serve the role of making energy. They're like the power plant for the cell. And once that starts being inefficient in producing energy, the cell weakens, can eventually even die. And if you get that on a global scale, you're going to get these things like cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance, mood disorder. But since we're talking about energy too, chronic fatigue and cognitive decline, mitochondrial dysfunction is associated with just about every chronic clinical disease that's out there. So it's definitely a bellwether for cellular health. And again, back to that conversation, here's an article talking about mitochondrial dysfunction and the aging process in its entirety. So Those first two, I think, are biggies. We get into the next three, which are omega imbalance. And this is looking at, what it sounds like, your omega-3s and your omega-6s from your diet. And the balance between those is a good indication for potential, pro-inflammation in the system or anti-inflammatory systems being enacted. So that's another part of this. And as it relates to this test versus the metabolomics, which is another one of our nutritional tests, the metabolomics does not include the omega imbalance and the essential fatty acids part of it. So could get it as an add-on, but on the NutrEval, it's part of the test. The toxic exposure, we're looking for things like heavy metals, but also, petrochemicals, plastics, other environmental toxins that we might not even be thinking about on the horizon. And then the last one there is methylation imbalance. Methylation is another cellular system. So this is kind of another cellular evaluation, and methylation is important in things like detox and hormone production and regulation. So we really want to make sure that that methylation is being supported with adequate nutrition as well. And another thing about this is, once you understand how those clinical and cellular concepts are being evaluated, then you start to understand how they're driving the nutrient recommendations as well, right? So if you have a lot of oxidative stress, of course, it's going to mean that a lot of these recommendations are going to be around antioxidants. If you have dysfunctional around methylation, then you're going to see a lot of B vitamin recommendations. So this is how our second page looks. And there's a lot of nutrients on here. So I tend to say, well, let's look at the trends, right? Is everything kind of trending low, medium, high? Which sections are really standing out? Is it all the antioxidants? Is it all the B vitamins? And so that's really important to know. Lined out here on kind of a 0 to 10 nutrient need score. So a 10 is like the highest need for that particular nutrient. We listed the daily recommended intakes there just for reference. And then in that green, yellow, red bubbles to the right of that is the suggested recommendations right here. So that's going to be age dependent, gender dependent, sex dependent, and it's also going to be obviously based on the results of the test. So these are going to change for patient to patient. That last section is left there just in case you want to make any alterations. All of the providers, clinicians, of course, you're going to know your patient better than we do. So that space is kind of a blank space for you to make any alterations. We also have some recommendations around GI support, and these are based on a lot of the organic acid markers. There's a vitamin D add-on that's available for this test that would be listed here if that was added on. And then at the bottom of the page, amino acids, which are sort of your building blocks, right? We get these amino acids from protein in the diet, and those are directly related to how those amino acids looked, whether you measured them in the serum or the urine. And so if we have amino acid deficiencies showing up on the test results, it's going to generate recommendations here. And as I said before, the next couple of pages are an interpretation at a glance page, and it's really a good walkthrough for the patient. Like you can see here with vitamin A, it tells you the function of the nutrient, the cause of deficiency, complications, and then ultimately food sources. So what I like to do clinically sometimes is anything I see in a yellow or a red, I'll just kind of start circling some of the foods in that little red bullet that I want them to kind of focus on moving forward. And so it helps them to kind of even generate a little bit of a meal plan. So that's kind of the roll up. That's like the data assessment and really the clinical takeaways from the data. Now we're going to actually go in and look at the data, and what by data I mean the analytes that were run in the lab. This is, everything that the lab churned out from the samples that were sent in. And we start with organic acids. And a lot of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with organic acid testing. And for those who aren't, hopefully we'll get a chance to run through this a little bit and even why we do organic acid testing. But high level organic acids are, they're compounds that are made in metabolic processes. If we think about this, all of these processes that are going on in the cell, like a highway system, these organic acids are moving along that highway, turning right, turning left, being turned one thing into another. I kind of think of it like a biochemical, hot potato or transition. And so these organic acids really at the end of the day are byproducts of processes in the cell. And they're useful because if you start to see an accumulation of one or another, then it gives you an indication that there could be needs for vitamin and mineral cofactors. It's sort of like if you see a population or you see a lot of cars backing up on that highway system, it would say, oh, right there is where there's a problem. There's a wreck. And usually from a biochemistry perspective, that wreck is there's an enzyme not working very well because it doesn't have enough of a vitamin or a mineral, or maybe it has some sort of genetic susceptibility or something of that nature. So if you think about the organic acids like that highway system, I think it kind of helps to understand how we're using them. And I'll show you this visual depiction on the next page. So this is sort of a, I'll say, broken down way to evaluate a couple of the main highways within the mitochondria. And at the top of the page, you'll see we have fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and that's coming from your diet. And really what this page is about is how those things ultimately turn into energy at the bottom. But the reason why we even include a page like this is to show how we're actually using these analytes to generate nutrient recommendations. And so I'll walk you through an example, and hopefully that'll kind of, if you haven't seen it this way before, it'll kind of help you click how we're arriving at, B vitamin recommendations from organic acids. So as an example, if we take this what's called beta oxidation system, very small part of this, it's where fats from your diet are converted into acetyl-CoA. And then acetyl-CoA can be used for energy production and things like that. And you'll see here that to make this work, you need magnesium and vitamin B2. Those are the cofactors needed. And so if they're available and everything's running smoothly, you won't see any backups. That those markers on the right-hand side that are circled in red would actually be perfectly normal, most likely. However, if you have a problem with magnesium and vitamin B2, what we see is a shunting off away from acetyl-CoA into these other products called adipic acid and subearic acid. And so by that logic, we can start to understand where we see backups, then we can assume, or we can see needs for nutritional support. And especially if you don't just look at one pathway, but then you look at one against another, against another, against another, you can see where we can start to map this all together. So that's basically how we're using this page. We just took this little example at the top left, but extrapolate that to hundreds and hundreds of different biochemical pathways, and you can really get some powerful assessments of needs for cellular nutrition. And the way that this page works is I tend to just look at the top and say, hey, these are some things that are coming in from the diet, and these are all trying to turn into that acetyl-CoA in the middle. If I see any alterations, I'm going to look at those little nutrient cofactors that are circled here as well. And then from acetyl-CoA, this comes down and it can go either into ketogenesis. That's actually a ketone body, that beta hydroxybutyric acid. So, I went at the beginning, I was talking about making sure you understand the clinical case in front of you along with the results. If you had somebody on the ketogenic diet, this might be really, really elevated, and you might think that there's something wrong, like insulin resistance or something else. But knowing that they're on ketogenic diet, that's going to be an expected finding for that to be elevated. So just a little reminder about always looking at these results in the context of the clinical history. The citric acid cycle is where this entire system spins around and around. And the way that I read this on this page is if I start to see just a lot of general abnormalities, then it's usually indicating a lot of needs for B vitamin support to help this smooth out, because ultimately the citric acid cycle generates ammunition to go down into the electron transport chain. And this is really kind of where the magic is happening. The electron transport chain is responsible for creating all the cellular energy, which is in the form of ATP. And so if it's not doing that efficiently, then we're going to have some cellular breakdown pretty quick. And we do have some things that relate to even the electron transport chain on this test. So things like CoQ10 and glutathione are important antioxidants for the electron transport chain. And lipid peroxides and 8-OHDG are pro-oxidants. They're oxidative stress markers. So you can kind of start to see visually how this is all fitting together. And really, I think that's kind of part of the cool thing about this test too, is you're not just getting a list of analytes like this. You're starting to really see the rationale and the logic there. That being said, that's not the only thing that we can learn from organic acids. The other things we can learn are, overall functional categories, like is there GI dysfunction, malabsorption, dysbiosis? We talked a lot about cellular energy already. Vitamin markers, another way to look at a lot of those B vitamin pathways. Neurotransmitters is, a completely separate topic to a certain extent. Toxin and detoxification markers, and even oxalates. So we'll talk a little bit about each one of those briefly. But before we do, I mean, we all love to talk about reference ranges and standard deviations and statistical science. I know we all love that. So just for your reference, when you see these little depictions, what you're seeing is that the red area is actually the reference range. So anything outside the red area is outside reference range. The yellow is in between 1 and 2 standard deviations. So if 2 standard deviations is the reference range, then that yellow is in between 1 and 2. And then everything in the green is, what we consider to be more optimal, and it's inside 1 standard deviation. So just, we get some questions on that sometimes. So I wanted to make sure and kind of lay that out for people. So the first section on the organic acids is the malabsorption markers. And these are actually breakdown products of a lot of proteins, amino acids in our diet. And so when the amino acids are fermented in the gut, then they can turn into some of these different products. And so I could tell you potentially about malabsorption of protein at the top there. The bacterial dysbiosis markers are just what they sound like. They're products of bacterial fermentation in the GI tract. So if you see a lot of these elevated all over the place, I might be asking about GI symptoms and maybe even thinking about some sort of bacterial overgrowth in the gut. One caveat to that is that some of these can come from dietary intake, especially dietary phenols like flavonoids, berries, cherries, chocolate, beer, wine, anything that's flavonoid and phenol rich. It won't normally elevate every single one of these. They tend to have their own pattern to them. So for example, if we see a lot, benzoic acid and elevation there, then I sometimes think about, whether that's either coming from benzoic acid used as a preservative, tartaric acid together with some of these. I sometimes think about wine. So just keep those in mind a little bit. If that's why I say, look at the general pattern. If it's all sky high, if it's all elevated, then that's a lot more indicative of something like a bacterial dysbiosis than maybe just a single one all by itself. As it relates to yeast, we swapped out arabinose for D-arabinitol. And we did that because there was just a lot better clinical support around D-arabinitol. It's a marker for specifically Candida albicans, tropicalis, parapsilosis. And it's mostly been studied around people who've had some sort of systemic candidiasis around this, but we also see this quite frequently when it relates to GI, potential GI involvement as well. So that's a pretty good marker. I always confirm suspicion of a fungal dysbiosis with something like a stool test like the GI-FX. Keep in mind, an organic acid test is looking at markers that are coming out in the urine sample. It's not going to be a direct one-to-one connection to what's going on in the stool sample. So the stool sample being more direct, I think, is always better as a confirmatory. We talked a lot already about the next section, which is these cellular energy and mitochondrial markers. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that because they're just listed out in a list format here, whereas before they were kind of in that pathway diagram. But a couple interesting things to highlight. Alpha hydroxybutyric acid is an interesting marker to me. It's been talked about as a little bit of a marker around glutathione status, but in the research, you see a lot of connection between overall poor lifestyle habits, which, I think when we're evaluating somebody clinically, lifestyle habits is, at least in my experience, not always where we get the most honesty out of the patient, tend to be a lot of downplaying from that perspective. And so when we're talking about lifestyle habits, including alcohol consumption, smoking, sedentary lifestyle, they've all shown to be kind of a contributor to this marker, which it makes sense because it's also a marker for overall metabolic dysfunction, right? So you think about metabolic insufficiency, you think about even fatty liver disease. It's all along that same sort of continuum. So keep in mind that this marker can give you maybe a little bit of a window to a story that maybe you're not even hearing clinically when you're talking to the patient. Beta hydroxybutyl methyl glutaric acid is not just a long, fun word to say, but it's also part of the HMG pathway. So it is a precursor to CoQ10 synthesis. Think about HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, our statins, right? Why do we say that people need to be taking CoQ10 if they're on a statin? It's because the suppression of that pathway leads to CoQ10 deficiency. Well, in the same way, if you see some deficiency in this particular product even without a statin, it might make you think same logic that there's some need for CoQ10 here as well. The vitamin markers are some additional pathways that are kind of more specific for an individual B vitamin. Popular one would be methylmalonic acid, which is in the middle of the page there under methylation markers. I can probably circle it here. Methylmalonic acid. This is a really classic marker for need for vitamin B12. This is a very strongly B12 dependent pathway. And so each one of these kind of has a little bit more of a direct connection to, those overall, the B vitamins. So they play a very strong role in looking at our B vitamin connections. So that's a one thing to know. We'll look at a couple individual examples. I mentioned the methylmalonic acid. And here again, the way that this works is you have this marker methylmalonyl-CoA with the support of B12. It's supposed to come down and turn into succinic acid. But if there's no B12, it'll slide over and turn into the thing we're actually evaluating, the methylmalonic acid. And it's pretty simple as that. And do the same idea with formiminoglutamic acid, looking at folate here. And then lastly, branched chain amino acid metabolism. Again, we have these depictions on the report just so you can see how these things are interconnected. And you don't even have to. If you don't like looking at, pathway analysis, you don't have to, but some people do, which is why they're on the report. Next section is the neurotransmitter metabolites. And again, we're still on the organic acid section, and think about how much clinical information we've already gotten so far. But as it relates to neurotransmitter metabolites, we have these subheaders to try and kind of help you figure out what these markers relate to. So the kynurenine markers, those are telling you a little bit about needs for vitamin B6. There's a very B6 dependent pathway. The catecholamine markers here are looking at what it sounds like, catecholamine production, epinephrine and norepinephrine production. That's what those markers are all about. And then this last one here, serotonin markers, 5-hydroxyindole acetic acid. This is a really interesting marker. It's a breakdown product of serotonin. And some people like to jump to the conclusion that, okay, well, that tells me, do they need serotonin support in the central nervous system for overall mood support? I would say maybe, maybe not. That one's a little bit difficult because 95% of our serotonin is produced in the GI tract, and it's done so to help with GI motility. So actually, what we tend to see more is that the higher level of this marker, the more likely the patient is suffering from some sort of, IBSD, some commonly loose stool diarrhea, things like that. And I'm not going to go too much into this kynurenine pathway. It's kind of interesting. Again, I said it's heavily B6 dependent. The things I have highlighted here are what we're measuring on the test. But one interesting thing that we've talked about, at least on our podcast, actually, is something around tryptophan steal, which is, if you see at the top here, we have tryptophan, and at the bottom is NAD, which is a very important molecule to the body. But tryptophan can decide to either go down to make NAD, or it can decide to go that way. Or if there's a strong need for serotonin, the tryptophan gets shunted over this direction. And so you have a little bit of the setup where tryptophan is having to navigate which direction to go, which is why there's a little bit of a colloquial term around tryptophan steal. So kind of interesting. If you want to learn more about that, you can check it out on the podcast for sure. Then we move into toxin and detoxification markers. Pyroglutamic acid is a marker for glutathione issues. Alpha ketophenylacetic comes from a thing called styrene. Styrene is, it sounds like styrofoam, right? It's plastics, petrochemicals, things like that, off-gassing styrofoams, plastic varnishes. The next one was a gasoline additive called MTBE that we're still finding in a lot of contaminated water tables, as well as underground storage. And then the last one, orotic acid, is thought to be more of just a marker for general needs for detoxification support. Last part of the organic acids is oxalate markers, and they tend to signify oxidative stress and damage. Sure, they can come from things in the diet, like high oxalate foods. They're also made from our own regular processes. About half of our oxalates that we find in our system and in our cell come from breakdown of our own collagen and just general normal turnover. And then the other half might be coming from dietary intake. So what do these markers tell you? Well, another pathway I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but as a collection of biomarkers, they provide some insight into basically abnormal metabolism of that pathway. And so oxalic acid is the big one we're looking out for because of kidney stones. Kidney stones are, for most people, due to high levels of oxalic acid. So as a high level, I think the oxalates, I think it's especially useful for people who have recurrent kidney stones. It's a strong risk factor in kidney stone development, but it's also there's a good amount of evidence to say that high levels of oxalates are shown and seen in oxidative stress and metabolic dysfunction as well. So keep that in mind. It's not just about somebody's having high oxalates in their diet, I should say. Oxidative stress markers is kind of the next section, and a doozy, a big part of the test. We have glutathione here, our most powerful antioxidant cellularly. We have CoQ10 here that we're measuring directly. And then we've got oxidative damage, right? We want to make sure we're limiting damage to our cells. And so lipid peroxides on the right-hand side, 8-OHDG. Lipid peroxides are damage to the fat, and that could be, your cell membranes, things like that. And then 8-OHDG is damage to DNA, which is always a bad thing. We don't want to be damaging our DNA at any point. So we want both of these to be low, and for the most part, we want strong antioxidant support. Then after the oxidative stress markers, we have the next section, which is amino acids, right? Our building blocks, our protein molecules. And really, if you're ordering a NutrEval, when it says, do you want an FMV NutrEval or a plasma NutrEval, it's specifically asking you about the amino acids. You're choosing, do I want to see amino acids in plasma, or do I want to see amino acids in first morning void or in the urine? The plasma amino acids tend to reflect more of a steady state of protein intake, maybe the past 2-3 weeks, something of that nature. So it tells you kind of like, are they protein sufficient, or are they protein deficient? Urine amino acids tend to be a little bit more of a reflection of kind of metabolic changes moment to moment. And so they're used a little bit differently. I prefer the plasma myself as a clinician because I want to make sure that my patient is getting enough protein in their diet. And amino acids are broken down into our essential amino acids and our non-essential amino acids. And the categorization means we cannot make any of the essential amino acids. We have to get those through our diet. The non-essentials we do have the capacity to make, as long as we have enough of those necessary essential amino acids on hand. And again, when I'm looking at the amino acids, I'm asking myself, what's the overall trend, right? Are things trending kind of right down the middle? Everyone's going to be a little bit different, a little bit unique. They might have a high here, a low here, but as long as that overall trend is looking pretty good, I think I get a good assessment that they have adequate dietary protein intake. And keep in mind, it might not just be about intake, right? It still has to be digested and absorbed, any protein that you're taking in. So if somebody has problems with digestion and absorption, that could be a reason why their amino acids are looking low. And then, like I said, the non-essential amino acids we can make in the body, but it does require a lot of additional support, things like B vitamins, particularly B6 and magnesium. So sometimes we'll see some differences where the essential amino acids look just fine, but the non-essentials are not looking very good at all. And that's more of an indicator for need for vitamin support. One question that's kind of interesting is, can we figure out whether somebody's amino acid status is coming from a problem with they're not eating enough protein or maybe not digesting enough protein? And we actually can. In most cases, we have these dietary peptide related markers. And the way that I use some of these is that this 1-methylhistidine or the 3-methylhistidine, those are meat byproducts. So the first one, 1-methyl, comes from chicken, turkey, and fish, whereas the next one, 3-methylhistidine, comes from red muscle fibers. So one thing is, if you know that you have a patient who is eating a lot of meat, and yet and those markers are on the high side, like this, very obvious they've been consuming it, but their amino acids are still low, that tells me that they have a GI problem related to digesting and absorbing the protein that they're eating. Because it's like, you're eating enough of it, I see it right over here, but your amino acids are still in the toilet. So it must be a problem with getting enough of digested and absorbed. The other thing to know is that the 3-methylhistidine is kind of interesting because I didn't say steak fibers, it comes from red muscle fibers. And that could be external from red meat intake, or doing exercise, breaking down your own red muscle. So one thing that I see commonly is if somebody has a high 3-methylhistidine and they tell me that they're a vegetarian, I know that it's not likely to be coming from red meat unless they're lying to me. It's coming from their own breakdown of their muscle. So keep an eye on that 3-methylhistidine in people you suspect muscle wasting. The next section is amino acid metabolites. We've got B vitamin markers. Again, just lending some additional information around needs for some specific B vitamins. These are amino acid byproducts. Urea cycle markers tend to reflect overall dietary protein intake and clearance. So anytime that's elevated especially urea. I might even be evaluating whether they're needing support with amino acid detoxification, or whether they need to back off their protein intake. And then glycine and serine is also important in a lot of different production pieces like acetylcholine and phospholipids for our cells, very much dependent on methylation support, B12 folate, as well as magnesium. The next section is the fatty acids, and probably fairly familiar with these for the most part. Things like omega-3 fats, omega-9 fat. Just what's the fat content? What types of fats is the person eating in their diet? And one thing to know is that this is a red blood cell analysis. So the red blood cell really provides a good window into the steady state of dietary fat intake. It's mostly what's been studied all over the research. And so that's why we chose a red blood cell analysis. It helps you understand a lot of different things. And we're reporting them as by what's called weight percent. It's like a big pie chart breakdown. It's looking at how much percentage wise is in the form of omega-3 versus omega-6 versus omega-9. Again, we did it that way because most of the research is looking at weight percent, and it's the only way that you're actually able to get an omega-3 index. So that's one of the reasons why we did that. So each section of the fatty acids, I'll take as an example, omega-3 fatty acids are broken down into their components, and they're also given an overall percentage for that category too. So you see the percent total omega-3s. And so you can hear, as it relates to omega-3s, say, oh, how much EPA are they getting? How much DHA are they getting? Most of you are familiar with DHA and EPA from our fish oils, but also how much total omega-3s are they getting? And I think that can be helpful, especially when we're comparing total amount of omega-3s to omega-6s. We also measure total omega-9s and some of the subcomponents of omega-9s, and then cardiovascular disease risk as it relates to the omega fatty acids, the essential fatty acids. I'll talk about that here on this next page. A lot of people focus in on the omega-3s because they are so important in reducing inflammation all throughout the system. And it comes obviously from cold water fish or some nut seeds like flax, chia, walnut, or of course, if somebody's taking an omega-3 supplement. But the biggies are EPA and DHA. Those are the ones that are really, really important for reducing inflammation, which is why when you actually add those two markers together, you end up with the omega-3 index. And this omega-3 index has been shown to be incredibly helpful in or at least there's a strong association with an low omega-3 index and cardiovascular disease risk. We tend to want to see that over 4, optimally over 6 or 8. So this is one of the most important markers on the page as it relates to cardiovascular disease risk. Omega-9s, we tend to think of coming from things like olive oil and other nuts and seeds, saturated fats, obviously coming from a lot of meat, dairy products, and then omega-6s coming from a lot of dairy meat products, but as well as a lot of grains and vegetable oils, things like that. So just kind of the general categories to be looking out for. And, is somebody over consuming one or another of the category is the way I kind of use that information. There's also a trans fat marker on here, which, knowing how terrible trans fats are from an oxidative stress perspective, you can evaluate whether somebody's getting too much trans fat in their diet. One other thing to know about the fatty acids is that sure, we're looking at the overall balance of fat intake, but we're also looking at how these fats are being used in the cell. So if you look on the right-hand side here, we've got omega-6 metabolism. It starts at the top with linoleic acid. That comes from things like vegetable oil, grains, meats. And there's an enzyme here that turns that thing into gamma linolenic acid, GLA. You've probably heard of it. And it can only do that if it's got adequate levels of those cofactors underneath, or at least a lot of those things regulate how efficient it is. And then even the next step is turning GLA into DGLA, which is our strongest anti-inflammatory omega-6, right? We want to have a lot of DGLA. So if you think about it, and if you're looking at what's happening on the right-hand side of the page, you're going from green to yellow to red. It's slowing down. And so that's a strong indicator that there's something going on from a vitamin perspective or a cofactor perspective that's causing this thing. We're getting a traffic jam. And this is exactly another way that we can use these biochemical markers that we're running on the test to tell us about nutritional need. I mentioned the trans fats there. It's located right there. Sometimes you can catch some people who say that they don't eat any fast food or processed foods when they have a high level of trans fat. And then the last section on the test is the elemental markers. So we've got nutrient elements on the left and then toxics on the right. So the nutrient elements, we are looking at 3 different ways: either plasma, whole blood, or red blood cell. So you'll notice it really depends on what nutrient we're assessing. We don't just take a one-size-fits-all approach. We say, okay, what's the best way to look at magnesium status? That's probably in the red blood cell. What's the best way to look at selenium? That's probably in the whole blood. And we did that based on our own internal analysis when we compared all 3 of these methods, because we actually have all of them at our disposal. And so it's a little extra work for sure, but at the end of the day, we're giving you a little bit better insight into nutritional adequacy. Again, red blood cell magnesium and potassium have been used a long time to reflect dietary intake, as compared to if you do a standard lab and you get magnesium, potassium in the serum, that's talking about electrolyte status, right? Homeostasis. One thing to note, these direct measurements of things like magnesium and potassium, they do play a strong role in the overall recommendation for that nutrient. Meaning, if somebody has a low red blood cell magnesium, then it's going to play a really big role in their recommendation for magnesium supplementation, but it's not the only thing that's part of that, right? This is a large algorithm. So sometimes we'll see a normal red blood cell magnesium, but maybe elsewhere in the test, there was evidence of some additional cellular magnesium support. So sometimes that throws people off, where they're like, how come you're recommending magnesium when their magnesium was normal on the last page? It's because there's a lot of different factors that go into that overall recommendation, if that makes sense. The toxic part of this is looking at whole blood measurements. So we've got lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. It's providing a window into recent exposure. And so one thing to note about that is that these reference ranges are based on the NHANES data. So this is looking at a kind of population level understanding of, if you're in that red, you're actually higher than 95% of the general population's levels for lead and mercury, which you definitely don't want to be. You'll notice there's no green area to the reference ranges here. That's because we always want to limit our exposure to all of these. So definitely don't want to be in the red. That means you're pretty darn elevated for toxic elements. And knowing that it's whole blood, the window of time that this person may have been exposed to that toxic is a little hard to guess. We tend to think that, the red blood cell represents around 90 to 120 days, and the plasma is more like 2 to 4 weeks. So the whole blood, what is the whole blood? It is a mixture of the plasma and the red blood cell. So, I think there's a argument to be made that it's somewhere in between those two, 90 days, 2 weeks, but we don't know for sure. So we do know it's recent exposure, most likely. It's most likely not body burden, maybe unless you're doing some sort of detox or something like that. But for the most part, we're talking about this person was recently exposed to mercury. We need to figure out where that came from. Last thing on here, we do have an add-on for some of the genomic markers like MTHFR, COMT, if you're familiar with genomic SNP testing, as well as vitamin D is a potential part of this test as well. So more information on those, if you're interested, you can always go to our website. And speaking of the website, we got a bunch of additional educational resources available. We've got a huge support guide. I mean, this is like, I don't know how many, it's like almost 100 pages, maybe it's over 100 pages, like over 1,000 literature citations. This is, if you want to learn anything about how to run an organic acid test or how to interpret an amino acid test, it is all in that support guide. It's incredible. I spent a long time building that out. We do have webinars on our website. We have medical educational consults available. So if you have a question, you don't know which test to run, or you've got a tricky patient, you don't know where to start, or this is your first time ordering a test, any of those things, half-hour, 45-minute consultations are available. So feel free, those are complimentary. You don't have to pay a dime for those. Just feel free to give us a call and set up some time so we can answer whatever question that you might have. I mentioned the Lab Report podcast, and yeah, just thank you guys so much for being attentive, being on board. I hope that it was informational, and I'm open to taking any questions that you might have.
Dr. Chapman, always a pleasure. That was fantastic. We got quite a number of questions, over 30 questions in the chat. So we'll
Wow.
probably, unfortunately, not be able to get to all of them today.
Yeah.
We won't waste any more time, and we will just jump right in and hammer out as many as we can in the next 8 minutes or so. So the first question that we got is, how can you lower lipid peroxidases, and what root causes can you look for?
Yeah, great question. So, anytime I get a question like this, it's sort of like input output, right? So what creates lipid peroxides, and then how do we deal with the fact that they're high right now? So first thing is you want to understand what's generating the oxidative stress. So that's, asking your patient a lot of questions. Do they have environmental exposures, free radical exposures? Are they exercising? Are they, all of these things are potential contributors to oxidative stress. Once you uncover that and you can deal with it and remove it, right, you're removing that generation, that obstacle, then you can come back in with things like antioxidant support, vitamin C, glutathione, and acetylcysteine to help with glutathione, even just more antioxidants in your diet, berries, cherries, all that sort of stuff that's going to help with antioxidants.
Fantastic. And quick shout out to Michael Brown, who's been using this test for at least 12 to 15 years, which is pretty
cool. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, original user. Next question is, would you be concerned with high serum B12 levels?
So this is actually a really hotly debated topic. And serum B12 levels, I think one thing you should know is that it's not specific to what type of B12. Out there is hydroxycobalamin, which is one form of B12. There's cyanocobalamin, there's methylcobalamin. And depending on what form that might be circulating, it's hard to know. And also realize that B12 can be produced in the gut too. So there has been some people out there suggesting that if you have a high serum B12 level, it could be actually gut produced. Most of the time, if you look at any sort of clinical concerns, contraindications, toxicities, things of that nature, serum B12 is generally regarded as fairly benign, although always make sure you're doing your due diligence. From my standpoint, I think if somebody has a serum B12 that's elevated, I've got them on a B12 supplement, I would run something like the NutrEval and say, okay, well, are they using the B12 or is it just floating around in the serum, right? Like, it's not meant to be used in the serum. It's meant to go into the cells and do the machinery. So that's where a complement test like this can really, really tell you some more information.
Awesome. Do you recommend, and if so, how long should a patient be off supplements prior to taking the test?
Good question. So if I'm taking them off to get kind of that baseline reading, then it depends on the supplement too. The B vitamins, they'll wash out in probably 2 to 4 days. So that's a good time window to say, okay, I think the B vitamins are probably not going to contribute to the test results anymore. If they're on an omega-3, that's fat soluble, so that's going to stick around a lot longer. Usually people don't want to wait 90 days to do the test. So I typically say, forget the omega-3s and your fat solubles, just go off your B vitamins, 4 days, and then we'll take a look.
Great. Could it be harmful to be on antioxidants for a long period of time? Could it be blunting the body's protective response if they have an infection?
I think from the perspective of redox, which is reducing agents and oxidizing agents, this system is always keeping itself in balance that way. So if you're giving a bunch of antioxidants, if you're dealing with a balance, right? So think of it like this way. You want to get this thing like, right? So if you got antioxidants on one side and reducing agents on the other, and you're constantly going like this, then you're going to be doing something that's not natural for the cellular system. Now, the way that I think you can handle that is that you look at those oxidative stress markers to know whether you're in balance or not. So if somebody has low 8-OHDG, which is that DNA damage marker, if they've got low lipid peroxides and they don't have a lot of oxidative stress on that front page, and you just keep dumping antioxidants, yeah, I don't think that would be very wise, which is, in general, probably why you're not going to get a recommendation from those results either.
Yep, that makes sense. Should you retest a patient, or I guess rather, how would you know when to retest a patient for the NutrEval?
Yeah, so I tend to think of, I ask myself, what do I want to get out of the information with this patient? If this is a new patient and I just drastically changed their diet based on the results, and I did a ton of different nutritional supplement changes. And I really want to know whether this is on board quickly. I would say 3 to 6 month window is a good window there. As that relationship with the patient gets longer and longer, and as I'm feeling more and more confident that we're humming at a good clip and they're doing really well, I might space it out a little bit more to like a year, just kind of part of their yearly physical. But that's kind of how I think about it, and how I bring it into my practice.
Great. This next question is, compared to other potential tests on the market that are offered by other labs, why should a practitioner go with the NutrEval?
Yeah, I think, it's hard because we don't do a whole lot of like talking about other labs and other
Sure.
methodologies.
Yeah, we won't name
Yeah.
names.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think the thing about the NutrEval that really stands out to me is I talked a little bit about it at the beginning. So much of our information that we're gathering is not just, oh, we went and we looked at the serum and you've got this concentration of B12, right? That's one-to-one relationship. Whereas with the NutrEval, the power is in that ability of like, we looked at 32 different analytes that are related to B12 and culminated all that information. And that's not just it was floating around in your blood. That was like that came out of your cells. So that's what does the work. It's almost like going into the factory and seeing where all the different machines and the assembly lines aren't working as well, and saying, okay, it needs more of that, needs more of that. And that's so much more powerful than just looking at input output, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm butchering that metaphor, but like that's
if I'm understanding it, I'm hoping the practitioners are understanding.
Okay,
that type of science always kind of fires me up, understanding the background of how these tests work.
And that's part of the thing is that, not only are we combining all that information together from a cellular perspective, we're also using the right method to look at that particular analyte. It's like every single one, we're like, glutathione, should we look at it here or look at it in the blood or the red blood cell or the serum? And we're making those decisions because we have all the platforms available to us. It's not the case with a lot of the other tests.
Yeah, and I think you're honestly speaking to the reason why Genova is Genova, right? You're not cutting any corners.
That's right. That's right.
So the next question I think is an interesting one. So when trying to decide the test order, where should the NutrEval fit in when you're looking at the SIBO as well as the GI testing?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. That's a great question. So I let the clinical presentation guide me there for the most part, knowing that there's often some overlap. But if I've got somebody in front of me who, obviously they have a lot of GI symptoms and stuff like that, that's going to steer me more to the GI effects test to really get the underlying root causes of their GI symptoms. But if it's somebody who wants to maybe optimize their physical fitness, maybe they're an athlete and they want to get more edge, that's a great place to optimize their nutrition. If it's something like I don't know, like an autoimmune condition or maybe a chronic fatigue, I think we get so much around cellular energy from the NutrEval is that's a great place to start, as compared to like with the GI, a lot of the things that aren't GI related are skin manifestations, and even like autoimmune conditions. So I kind of let those kind of general groupings guide me a little bit, but it can go either way depending on the patient.
I love it. Well, folks, that was our last question that we had time for. Dr. Chapman, do you have any final words for the audience? We have 100 people still here with us.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just appreciate everyone, being attentive and listening. I know that's a lot of information, it's a ton. So if you feel super overwhelmed, like you're drinking from a fire hose, go check out that support guide. It's a valuable resource for any test. Give us a call. We're always here for you guys. And just thanks so much. And thanks to Rupa and you, Adrian, for letting me come on and chat.
Absolutely. See you in about a month or so out in Las Vegas at A4M.
It'll be great. Look forward to it.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Chapman. You're welcome to hop off. And folks, for those of you who do have a few more minutes to stick around, I'm going to show you exactly how to order the NutrEval as well as any test from Genova directly from Rupa Health. So for those of you who may have joined late or this is your first time, my name is Adrian Martinez. I am the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. And what I'd love to do today is talk to you just very briefly about Rupa, who we are, what we do, and why do we put these presentations on every single week with our fantastic partners that are on our platform. Well, Rupa Health is a functional medicine lab platform designed to make life easier for you when it comes to lab testing. Currently, there are a ton of different pain points when it comes to ordering lab tests, right? If you've been in the industry for a while, you probably have a number of different accounts, and each time you want to order those tests, you have to go to each individual lab to place those orders, to manage your results, to import them into your EHRs, to manage your patient experience, all that. Well, we're here to solve those pain points. So the way that we do that is we've created a one-stop shop. So now instead of having to go to each individual lab to place your orders and demand your results, you come to Rupa Health and you have access to over 30 different labs in one place. What you're seeing is the Discover's Labs tab here. You're able to search by lab, you're able to search by biomarker, by category, and you can even open up here and see exactly all the labs that we work with, right? Of course, Genova's right on there. They're probably our biggest and most favorite lab that we work with, but we work with a ton of others. And so again, the idea here is now you have a one-stop shop to come on and see exactly what's on the platform. Additionally, we have tools like lab test comparison tools. So if you're in between a couple of different tests and not sure necessarily what direction to go with, you can actually create a comparison tool to see exactly, hey, what's the breakdown? What are the costs? What are the biomarkers that are being tested in this? What's the collection instructions? So we have that available for you here, and it's raw data. To create an order is super simple. We just need the patient's first name, last name, and email address. From there, we collect everything else directly from the patient to complete the order, making things more streamlined so you don't have to have the whole patient file on hand to actually fill all that stuff out. We'll collect that from the patient. And then from there, you can jump in and you can actually hop into this order screen and do things like creating custom bundles. So you can bundle sets of tests, sets of blood panels from a combination of any lab that you want to work with. That way, one click, and they're added into your cart straight away. Down below, you can create a favorites list. So individual tests that you commonly order, you put a little heart next to it, and you're able to order from all of them at your fingertips. So if I want to order that NutrEval from Genova, but I also want to order that metabolomics, and maybe I want to order a genetics test or a GI test, or you name it, from any of the labs that we work with, you can go ahead and click those. And if that's it, you just go ahead and click send to patient. And that's how you're able to order from 30 plus labs, over 3,000 different tests within a matter of seconds. How does our pricing work? You're probably asking. It's simple. We charge wholesale practitioner prices. So what that means is the same price that you would get going directly to the labs is the chart price that we charge here at Rupa. The way that we make our money is there's a flat 7% processing and ordering fee on each order, and that's paid by whoever pays for the tests. So what that means is that since Rupa is free to sign up for, free to use, this 7% is completely free. So if you're having us bill and manage billing with the patient, then the patient will pay that 7%. In that scenario, Rupa is free for you. Of course, you do have the option of paying for the test yourself, in which case you would just simply bill the patient outside of our platform. From there, you can add notes for the patient. You can add notes for Rupa. You can also add ICD code to any order. We'll go ahead and automatically create a super bill so your patient can submit that to their insurance for potential reimbursement. So that's how you're able to order from all your tests in one place. But that's not it with Rupa, right? Not only is it a place where you can order all your tests, but we'll also manage the patient experience end to end. We understand that the patient experience comes with its own set of pain points. So as soon as you press send on that order, we'll reach out to that patient, collect payment if we need to. We'll send over the kits to the patient. We'll drop ship them. So no longer are you going to have to stock kits in your office. Apologize if you're hearing a little squeaking in the background. That's just my golden retriever having some fun. We'll send over instructions, FAQs, oftentimes videos on how to take the test as well. And we'll also handle any support. So if there are any questions when it comes to how do I take this test, your patient will reach out to us and we have a full patient support staff on hand. Additionally, we'll even handle specimen issues as well as helping to coordinate phlebotomies. All these things would generally fall on your shoulders and take out time out of your day, out of your week. And so we will give you that time back so you can focus on seeing more patients, building your business, playing more golf, whatever the heck it is that you want to do, we will help you achieve your goals. From there, we're checking and follow up with your patients, and then you're notified as the results come in. And this is what that looks like. So we'll reach out to the patient, let them know, hi, patient, your practitioner has ordered these tests for you. We'll introduce who we are. And one thing that's really unique about Rupa is not only can we accept credit and debit, but we can also accept HSA, we can accept FSA, and we can also set up an interest-free payment plan with your patients to be able to pay for the cost of these tests. We understand that these tests can be very expensive and oftentimes prohibitive. So anything that we can do to allow your patients to be able to have these payment solutions will help provide a better overall patient experience, patient support, all those things to help you ensure that your business is continuing to grow. From there, this is what the instructions will look like that we'll send to your patient. We'll send over instructions for each one of the tests. We'll walk them through how to fill out the requisition form. And if there is a blood draw required, we will go ahead and send over the options based on the lab that they're working with. But if they are interested in maybe some alternative options, they can reach out to our team. We have a full phlebotomy database inside of our system that we can search by zip code and send over any viable options. For example, if the patient wants a mobile phlebotomist, right, they reach out to our team and we will go ahead and send over any options within their area. And that's how finding a phlebotomist works. We'll follow up with your patient, and then you are notified as the results come in. So once those results are coming in, you just bop right back over to your main dashboard and you're able to track everything right here in your main screen. You're able to search by patient. You can filter by status of your orders. You can see all the different statuses of your different orders here. Click into any one that's in progress. And I can see, for example, when the sample arrived at the lab, when I can expect those results to come in. And once those results are in, I can download them. I'm able to send them to my patients, and I can even schedule a clinical consultation. I know Dr. Chapman mentioned previously, Genova is a resource. By working through Rupa, you're not losing any of those resources that you would if you were to be working directly with the labs. You can still schedule time working with a Genova clinician to help interpret your results and ensure that you're getting the best possible knowledge base when going through these tests. So what I've shown you thus far is that you are able to not only order all your tests in one place, but you're also able to have your patient taken care of, but you're also able to come and learn. And you're actually all part of Rupa University right now. Rupa University is the educational leg of Rupa Health. So we host these live classes on a weekly basis. We're probably taking some time off for the holidays on a couple of weeks, but we're generally operating on a weekly basis. So you'll see here the one, of course, that we just did with Michael Chapman, but we do it with all of our lab partners. And so if you are interested in this type of education, be sure to check out rupauniversity.com to see all of the webinars that we've done previously, as well as the ones that we have upcoming. And beyond that, if you're interested in even more of a deep dive of going through these learnings, we also do boot camps. I forgot the R. rupauniversity.com. So you're able to sign up for these 6 weeks, more intensive boot camps. We're actually about to launch one along with Genova in regards to the GI test that they offer. And so you're able to hop in. It's with Dr. Kate Henry. You're going to do a 6-week Genova GI effects boot camp. Check it out. This is a paid option. It will come with a test as well when you're signing up for it. But check out rupauniversity.com to get access to that. And then the last thing is, if you are a practitioner and your license type may limit your ability to order this test or really any test directly, we can work with you. We have a program, it's called Physician Services. And through the Physician Services program, you're able to partner with a licensed physician to be able to order tests on your behalf, or rather for your patient on their behalf. So if that's something that you are requiring and your license type may limit your ability to order tests directly, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Adrian Martinez. I'm the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. This is my contact information, so don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be more than happy to spend some time walking you through the platform, answering any questions that you might have, and look out for a couple of things coming your way in the next week or so with a recording of this webinar with the slides. And if you do need anything, again, please reach out. But thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hop into the questions real quick to see if there are any questions for me. No CME for the boot camps currently. The reason for that is they're generally sponsored by the labs themselves. And so due to the fact that, it's a specific test and specific lab that we're going over, there's no CE currently. They're not to say that that won't be in the works down the line, but that's definitely something that's not available at this time. How do patients get blood drawn if out of our state? Great question. So April, you're actually bringing up a very important detail that I want to touch on. So currently Rupa is only available within 47 of the 50 states, right? The 3 states that we can't offer in is New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island for varying reasons. But with that, if you are working with a patient that's out of state, right? I was talking to a practitioner a couple of weeks ago who was in Texas, and they were trying to coordinate a phlebotomy for their patient out in Sacramento here in California, and they had spent hours doing this. I told them about Rupa and how we can help with that, and they were so relieved because they had spent hours of their time doing that. And so the way that we do that is we'll send over the resources, Genova or Access or really any of the labs that offer blood tests have their own resources for a patient to reach out to schedule a blood draw. But if the patient needs anything else, right, maybe they want some alternative options, we actually have, they can search by zip code, or even you can search by zip code within your phlebotomy map here and see all the different options within your area. So we have this phlebotomy map here. It's a bit busy with this one since those are all mobile phlebotomists in the areas that they cover, but you're able to search by zip code right here in this phlebotomy map. There are a few and very expensive phlebotomists in the San Jose area, $85 for a blood draw. Yeah, Evelyn, I mean, unfortunately, just simply due to the fact that oftentimes these specialty labs require third parties to draw the blood. Yeah, they will be a little more expensive. But that being said, you are able to search, let's say like San Jose, and generally we'll have the cost of the phlebotomists in that area associated to those different options, right? And so if I click onto this one, perhaps, right? So here's one that is mobile lab collections for $40, right? And so definitely check out this phlebotomy map, and you can see some alternative options potentially for cheaper costs. Kelly Dunlap, thank you so much for applying. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to you soon. There's no exact time frame on how long it takes for the physician services to get back to you. Generally, it's within a few days, but currently we're not providing a direct time frame simply because of the fact that it is relatively new. And so we want to make sure that, we aren't giving promises that we can't deliver on when it comes to exact time frames on when you would hear back on that. But generally, it is within a couple of days, but if you don't hear back, feel free to reach out directly to me, and I can yell at some people for you. But thanks, y'all. I'll give it the good old 7-second countdown if there's no more questions. Again, I appreciate you so much. Here's my information once again. Super easy to reach out to me, Adrian at rupahealth.com. That's ADRIAN. Be sure to check out Rupa if you are interested in testing. Again, y'all, this is completely free, right? So even if it's something that you want to join and just check out to see our education, see what our pricing is, again, with wholesale practitioner prices, there's quite literally no negative to signing up for Rupa, right? It's sign up for the platform, whether you want to use it or not is completely up to you. We're intended to be a complement to your practice. You don't sign a contract. The only time you'll ever sign anything is if you, or pay anything is if you decide to pay for the test yourself. So we appreciate you so much for joining us today. Again, I'm Adrian. We hope to see you again. If I don't see you again, hope you have an amazing Thanksgiving if you're here in the US or an expat. And if not, happy holidays, but we'll be back again next week for another Rupa University live class. Take care, everyone.